commit into the hands of God the soul of his servant Queen Elizabeth.
Now on BBC One, the BBC News with Fiona Bruce, live from Windsor. In a day of ceremony and sorrow, the nation and the world has bidden farewell to Queen Elizabeth II. King Charles followed the procession of his mother's coffin from Westminster Hall as the state funeral began. The coffin was carried into Westminster Abbey for a service attended by 2,000 guests, including 500 foreign leaders, royals and dignitaries. All the generations together, the Queen's grand and great-grandchildren in solemn procession.
All who follow the Queen's example and inspiration of trust and faith in God can with her say, "We will meet again."
The funeral march echoed around central London as the coffin was accompanied on its final journey by members of the armed forces from the UK and Commonwealth. Around the country, people gathered in towns and cities to watch the funeral and to pay their own respects.
A few of us were singing hymns along and the national anthem, just immensely proud to be British.
Everybody stood up, everybody sang, it was very emotional.
After the spectacular pageantry in London, the day ended here at Windsor, the home of the Queen since childhood. Down the long walk, crowds gathered to watch the Grenadier Guards accompany the late Queen to her last resting place. And in the final act of a day laden with ceremony, the wand of the Lord Chamberlain was broken, symbolising the end of the late Queen's reign, and it will be buried with her. Good evening from Windsor, the final resting place of the late Queen and where a service has just been held in St George's Chapel in honour of her life. Earlier, a day of the highest ceremony, not seen in this country for nearly 60 years, mixed with private sorrow as the state funeral was held in Westminster Abbey, the building in which Queen Elizabeth was married and crowned. King Charles, along with other members of the royal family, walked behind her coffin as it was taken into the Abbey from Westminster Hall, where it had been lying in state. Hundreds of dignitaries, including world leaders, joined members of the royal family and the public at the service. In his sermon, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, said the Queen had touched a multitude of lives during her 70-year reign. We start tonight with our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell on the state funeral held today for Queen Elizabeth.
On a clear morning in September, the world focused its attention on London for the grandest and most solemn of events. For a revered monarch who'd reigned for longer than any other, all the honours of a state funeral. Within Westminster Abbey, where great moments of history have been staged for more than 1,000 years, the leaders of many nations came together to pay their tributes. Macron from France, Biden from the United States, Trudeau from Canada, and scores of others. They joined political leaders from the nations of the United Kingdom, all the living British Prime Ministers, faith leaders, charity workers, and citizens, at a moment in the nation's affairs when rank took second place to the desire to pay respect. To the tolling of a single bell, the bearer party from the Grenadier Guards brought the Queen's coffin from Westminster Hall to place it on the gun carriage. At 10:45, the order was given for the cortege to step off. Walking behind the coffin, the King, his sister, the Princess Royal, his two brothers, the Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex. Behind them, the Prince of Wales and his brother, the Duke of Sussex. From the Palace of Westminster, around Parliament Square and into Broad Sanctuary, the gun carriage was drawn by 142 members of the Royal Navy to the great west door of the Abbey Church, where as a young princess she had been married and later crowned as sovereign. As the coffin was borne up the Abbey's central aisle, among the family members walking behind, two small figures, Prince George and Princess Charlotte, aged 9 and 7 respectively, attending this most solemn of state occasions. On the coffin, a wreath with rosemary for remembrance, myrtle, the symbol of a happy marriage, and English oak, symbolising the strength of love. And a card handwritten by the King in loving and devoted memory, Charles R.
In profound thanksgiving, we come to this house of God. We gather from across the nation, from the Commonwealth, and from the nations of the world, to mourn our loss, to remember her long life of selfless service.
All the music and readings had been approved by the Queen herself. They included a hymn sung at her wedding. In his sermon, the Archbishop of Canterbury spoke of a life devoted to duty.
People of loving service are rare in any walk of life. Leaders of loving service are still rarer. But in all cases, those who serve will be loved and remembered when those who cling to power and privileges are long forgotten. The grief of this day, felt not only by the late Queen's family, but all round the nation, the Commonwealth and the world, arises from her abundant life and loving service, now gone from us. She was joyful, present to so many, touching a multitude of lives.
After prayers, the sounding of the last post and a 2-minute silence. the national anthem was sung, and the coffin was borne from the Abbey on the shoulders of the Grenadier Guards. As the funeral procession set off through the great streets and avenues of ceremonial London that she knew so well, a field gun fired in Hyde Park. The way was led by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Canada, the Commonwealth country she visited more than any other. It included military detachments from across the Commonwealth, recipients of the Victoria Cross and George Cross, and health workers from the NHS. The gun carriage was drawn up Whitehall and past the cenotaph, where the standards of the Royal British Legion were lowered in respect. Following behind the cortege in a vehicle, George and Charlotte with their mother and the Queen Consort. The procession stretched the length of the Mall and beyond. It brought the gun carriage to Buckingham Palace, past the balcony where she'd first appeared in 1927 at the age of 1, and where she'd been seen most recently during her Platinum Jubilee. Constitution Hill to Wellington Arch, close to her childhood home on Piccadilly. The military detachments and the bands were drawn up. The royal family watched as the bearer party placed the coffin in the state hearse for the final departure from the capital. The streets of central London had been cleared of all traffic, but the pavements were full, lined with many thousands of spectators who wanted to witness this final journey of their late Queen to her beloved Windsor Castle. The grey of the city gave way to the green fields of Berkshire. The long walk leading up to the castle was crowded for as far as the eye could see. The hearse was flanked by foot guards with their rifles reversed and accompanied on a rural road by the pipes and drums and a sovereign's escort of the household cavalry. The hearse made its way up the long walk. In places, the crowds were standing 20 or more deep. It was at Windsor that the Queen could indulge her passion for horses. As the coffin went by, it was watched by Emma, one of the ponies she'd ridden in recent years. As the hearse entered the main quadrangle of the castle, 2 of the Queen's corgis had been brought out by the Queen's staff. Watching the coffin's arrival at the castle, the King and other members of the family. In St George's Chapel, a congregation of people who'd known or worked for the Queen had gathered for the committal service. This is the chapel she had known as a girl, where she had worshipped as an adult, and where now she will be buried. The Queen's coffin was placed on the catafalque. The Dean of Windsor spoke of her uncomplicated Christian faith and her reassuring presence.
In the midst of our rapidly changing and frequently troubled world, her calm and dignified presence has given us confidence to face the future as she did, with courage and with hope.
At the conclusion of the service, the instruments of state, the imperial state crown, the orb and the sceptre, which had been presented to the Queen at her coronation, were removed from the coffin and placed on the high altar. With the King watching, the Lord Chamberlain, the most senior official in the royal household, broke his wand, a white staff which is the symbol of his authority, and placed it on the coffin. The public lamentation for the life and reign of Elizabeth II was coming to a close. It was time for the world to draw back, to leave her finally to her family for her burial this evening in a small side chapel alongside her late husband. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
I'm joined now by our royal correspondent Daniela Ralph. And Daniela, it's been a day of the most remarkable public ceremony. But as Nick Witchell was saying there, it ends a little later here this evening in a private burial.
That's right, Fiona. It has been a day of private family grief sitting alongside a nation's public mourning, and we have seen this pageantry and ceremony on an at times breathtaking scale. But the Queen is now back here in Windsor, the place that has been her home in recent years, where she has celebrated baptisms and weddings and where she made that final lonely farewell to her husband, Prince Philip. And we now move into the final stages of the funeral day, and they will feel very different. They will be in private. This evening, the Queen will be buried with her husband, her father, her mother and her sister in the small, simple King George VI Memorial Chapel here in Windsor. We're told it will be a deeply personal ceremony for immediate family only. So after this period of time where the Queen's death has been a very public event, these final moments are for those who knew her best, as her family are given the privacy to say a final goodbye.
Daniela, thank you. Well, huge crowds gathered in near silence in streets surrounding Westminster as the Queen's coffin was taken to Westminster Abbey and then on to Windsor. Many people, young and old, from across Britain had camped out for days to witness the elaborate spectacle of pageantry, pay their final respects and share a moment of history. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning was among the crowds on the Mall as those gathered in London paid their tribute to the Queen.
Inside the Abbey, kings, queens, presidents and prime ministers. Outside, the ones without titles or palaces. But a rich, collective love for the Queen, almost beyond compare. Her country. The sound of thousands, total silence down the Mall, a mass of people, but the thoughts individual, personal. The final goodbye. No one wanted this moment to end. they knew that would be the end of this era. From early morning, thousands had streamed onto the Mall, determined to surround the Queen on this journey.
I've got a beautiful picture of my mum.
From Birmingham, sisters Pam and Alice also mourning their mother.
Our mum would sit in front of the telly when the Queen speak, and she would always used to prefer be quieter when my friends on telly.
And my mum always said, if it wasn't for her, we wouldn't be here. When we was growing up, she always told us that the Queen invited us Indian people here.
You're like staring away at everybody, aren't you?
3-month-old Bobby will never know the Queen.
She's been such an inspirational lady. Bringing Bobby was about, yes, she's part of history, but it's something we'll be able to talk about.
The words and music from the service filled the Mall, captivating, moving this open-air congregation. Across the generations, who will ever forget this moment?
It's humbling to have been here, and I think to have brought Bobby, it's the future as well. You know, this is the end of an era, but also the start of a new one. I'd echo the Queen and Vera Lynn in you know, it wasn't necessarily a goodbye, but a we'll meet again.
May you rest in peace. You served this country well. You served us all well. She was everybody's Queen. All our Queen. So she's done us proud still.
The British people loved having her as their Queen. Lucy Manning, BBC News.
It wasn't just in Westminster and Windsor that people were able to see the Queen's coffin. The 22-mile route from Wellington Arch to Windsor Castle provided plenty of opportunities for the public to say a final goodbye. Adina Campbell has been speaking to some of those who went out to witness the moment the Queen's coffin went by on her final journey to Windsor.
Today was always going to be a family occasion. In Hounslow, West London, the Lopez family would normally be celebrating Ivana's birthday, but those plans have been pushed aside, and cheer has been replaced by silence.
It's very hard to watch, very emotional. Yeah, emotional. 96, she ran the country.
They wanted to see the Queen face to face, but we won't get a chance to see in the future now.
It was kind of upsetting by seeing a lovely Queen's dead.
Outside, the crowds were ready to say their final goodbyes. And joining them, the Lopez family, who made the short walk from their front door to the front of the line.
It means a lot for our family to come here and see this is the last day of the Queen's.
When we knew the Queen was going down the A4, we were really, really happy. So we've come here about 2 hours ago and we've been waiting.
I think she served the country for so many years, and I think she was a great person and she helped a lot of people.
She's done a lot for our country, and it's important we all get to see her pass.
And then, the moment they'd been waiting for.
Come from Goa. Tell me what it means for you and your family.
The Queen has allowed for other people to come here and to work, and now since we are here for so many years, it's like a home for us. It was really emotional. We were just clapping just to give her as a token of thanks.
Adina Campbell, BBC News, Hounslow.
Just over half an hour ago, a ceremony took place here in Windsor in St George's Chapel, the final resting place of the Queen. The famous Long Walk was packed with thousands of people joining members of the armed forces. My colleague Rita Chakrabarti has been out among the crowds today. We can join her now. Rita.
Fiona, the crowds are now dispersing after a long day on the long walk. But for people who want to hang on here, there are clips of the late Queen's life being played on the big screens behind me. I would say that the atmosphere here has been quiet and reflective, but there's been a positive element too. People have wanted to celebrate a long life well lived, as well as, of course, wanting to mourn the late Queen. And it's been clear from today that Windsor remembers her with deep affection, as well as respect and admiration. The view from the long walk, recorded by thousands of devotees. This was not a crowd of world leaders or dignitaries, but of ordinary people who came to say goodbye.
Been quite emotional through most of it, actually, to tell the truth, which is generally not me, so, and you.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, we just had to come up to witness it, like.
Yeah.
It's made me feel very emotional, but it was nice to see her come home and to say my final goodbye. And she'll be with Philip soon, won't she? So they'll be together.
Earlier in the day, a different mood prevailed, of anticipation and even festivity. Some had evidently been here for hours, but young and not so young were all here to say farewell. The Peabody family from Northamptonshire were passing the time and wouldn't have been anywhere else.
We wouldn't have missed it for the world. I mean, the Queen has done so much for Great Britain and the world, and we just needed to be here and ensure that we could pay our respects to her, as probably half of the UK and half of the world will be doing today. So just a tremendous honour to be here.
Headmistress Rhian Thornton camped out overnight, even though she didn't have far to come.
I live in Windsor and I work at the school, Upton, just over there. So we've got a little group of Upton families here, all here together. We used to wave to the Queen on her way to Royal Ascot as a school, so I wanted to just come and wave one last time for myself.
Many others came from far afield.
We got here at 10 o'clock last night, so we've been here all night.
Hadiel Miller and family travelled all the way from Yorkshire.
It's great how we all come together as a nation.
Something bonding.
I think we're all in quite high spirits today, but at the moment, but the mood will definitely change later.
And it did. Solemnity and tears, and then the 2-minute silence. As the procession with the hearse went past, applause rippled up the long walk, with people showing their appreciation in the simplest way. It was quiet, but there was deep emotion too.
It's wonderful to be here with so many people of from all over the country, and to pay our final respects to the Queen, her final long walk.
So many reasons to be here. Community, commemoration, and straightforward affection. A day that no one here will ever forget. Rita Chakrabarti, BBC News, Windsor.
Well, as we've heard, the service in Westminster Abbey was attended by more than 2,000 people, which included heads of state from around the world, as well as foreign royalty. Aside from the security challenges, the day also brought some diplomatic sensitivities. Our diplomatic correspondent, James Landale, looks at the day world leaders descended on London to pay their respects.
As the King's car passed by the many Commonwealth flags en route to the Abbey, it was clear that this funeral transcended national borders. She was, one biographer wrote, Queen of the world, and today's symbols and service bore witness to that truth. Political leaders may have flown from all corners of the world, but their last journey was by bus. Rarely can so many African leaders have shared an outing quite like this. But there were too many of them to come by car, so they came together and queued together. In they came, some 500 foreign dignitaries in all, including about 100 heads of state and government. From North America, the President of the United States, Joe Biden, and his wife, they didn't take the bus. And Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, who did. He first met the Queen when he was just a boy. From Europe came President Macron, who's spoken so warmly of French affection for the Queen, and kings and queens from across the continent, from Spain to Sweden, Norway to the Netherlands. There were leaders too from the other side of the world, from New Zealand and Australia and many of the Pacific Isles. From Africa, a long line of statesmen and women, especially from the Commonwealth, the international organisation the Queen shaped and nurtured. And it was on the Commonwealth that so many prayers dwelt.
With gratitude, we remember her unswerving commitment to a high calling over so many years as Queen and head of the Commonwealth.
Let us give thanks for Queen Elizabeth's commitment to the Commonwealth throughout her reign.
Then, as the service ended, it was time for the foreign guests to get back to their queues and their buses. And yes, that is the King and Queen of Spain, waiting in line like the rest. Meanwhile, the Queen's coffin processed up the Mall, escorted by Mounties from a country she liked to call home, and an array of servicemen and women from across the Commonwealth, a body to which she had devoted her life, and which today, in return, honoured her memory. James Landell, BBC News.
The Queen died on the 8th of September in Balmoral, and since succeeding to the throne, King Charles has taken part in services of remembrance in all the nations of the country. In a moment, we'll hear from our correspondent Howell Griffith in Wales and Emma Vardy in Northern Ireland. But first, our Scotland editor James Cook on the events held today in honour of the Queen across the UK.
400 miles north of London, a lone lament for Elizabeth. The Royal Yacht Britannia is long retired, but its crew will never forget serving their Queen.
It's a sad moment and it's a sad day today because you'll never ever get the likes of Her Majesty the Queen again. She was one off. She was loved throughout the world. She was a monarch, she was a sovereign, and she was a mother. And in a way, she was our mother on here.
She was respected here too, outside her Edinburgh home, the Palace of Holyrood House, at the foot of the Royal Mile. Last week, this ancient thoroughfare, where history seeps from every stone, was packed as the Queen lay in rest here at St Giles Cathedral. Today, with the funeral underway in London, it is quieter, but by no means silent. On Royal Deeside, though, where the Queen spent her final hours, the funeral was a private affair, observed away from the cameras. But not everywhere was closed. Back in Edinburgh, the Crichtons, visiting from New Zealand, found a pub which was showing the ceremony.
The Queen and the royal family, despite being many, many thousands of miles away, we followed them and we felt that they were still part of our lives.
And yet, closer to home, a very different view. Is the monarchy important to you in your life?
No. They're symbols, but I don't see how they impact my life at all. There's no use for it for us. All it is road closures at the end of the day. And I get obviously the Queen's been doing it, she was doing it for over 70 years, which is amazing. She didn't choose that life, and that's something that we do sympathise with a little bit. But yeah, no, it's not our... I don't think we need it anymore.
That debate will continue under Charles, with Elizabeth now anchored in history. James Cook, BBC News, Edinburgh.
A faithful few feeling part of something much greater. At St Elvan's Church in Aberdare, they came to share their grief and show their reverence.
It was very emotional and I think we all cried. I think it was first when she came out and they put her coffin on the carriage. That's the bit that got me.
For Sarah, there was a personal connection too.
The Queen did so much for the people, and I just wanted to be with the people who have brought me a lot of comfort since my mother passed away in 2020, so that's pretty much why I came. It's like losing your grandmother, isn't it?
Who has taught us by his holy apostle St Paul.
From the theatre in Colwyn Bay to care homes up and down Wales, small groups gathered finding comfort in company. In Caernarfon, a few veterans paid their own silent tribute. Unlike other parts of the UK, there were no ceremonial events in Wales today to mark the funeral, no big screens in public places. But this is still seen by some as a significant moment here, the end of a relationship that stretched back before Elizabeth's time as Queen. She came first as a princess and in 1946 was made a member of the Gorsedd, the Welsh Circle of Poets, and given the bardic name Elizabeth or Windsor. In the latter part of her reign, it was the Senedd which became the centre of the relationship, signalling royal approval for what became Wales's parliament.
She redefined the United Kingdom. She said, I'm going to do what I did in Scotland in Wales if you want me to do it. So just ask me, just invite me.
It's a legacy welded into Wales's history after an era where so much has changed. Hywel Griffith, BBC News, Aberdare.
In Belfast, the grounds of City Hall provided a window on the ceremony in Westminster. For those who consider themselves British, this is a final farewell to a much-loved head of state.
She means a lot to Northern Ireland. I suppose this country has its friction over the years, but she's been kind of a force for reconciliation, hasn't she?
She'll never be forgotten, will she? Ever, ever. I'm getting emotional, I'm sorry.
There's been a sense of stillness and quiet here in Belfast today as the sounds and hymns from the funeral have echoed around the city centre and people have paused to pay their respects and feel a sense of connection to the events happening in London. But while much of the UK has been captivated by the royal events of the past 10 days, nationalist areas of Northern Ireland have a different relationship with the monarchy. Here in Newry, near the Irish border, many businesses plan to stay open.
It's fascinating to watch the pageantry and stuff like that there, but it's not the be-all and end-all. She was a lovely, lovely lady, but it's just business as usual.
I remember Dublin City.
Within the nationalist and Republican community, royalty isn't something that would be top of everybody's agenda. That said, there is respect for our neighbours.
After 30 years of conflict between Unionists and Nationalists, the late Queen had helped bridge the most difficult of divides.
She's viewed as somebody who's contributed to the peace here, and the views that I have seen and heard from members of the community here are those of respect.
Let us pray for His Majesty the King.
Back in Belfast, laying to rest the Queen also raises questions about Northern Ireland's future.
There's still issues of hurt and still issues of reparations, and there's still issues of divided community. So all of that, still has to be addressed. But the foundation stones are there.
And today, Belfast joined with millions in an affectionate goodbye. Emma Vardy, BBC News.
Now let's take a look at how people have been following the funeral elsewhere in England. The ceremony was broadcast in venues in many parts of the country, including at St Wolfram's Church in Grantham, where people had gathered from early this morning. This was the scene in Leeds, where hundreds of people, young and old, gathered in the drizzle in Millennium Square to pay their respects to the Queen. And dock workers in Southampton paid their own innovative tribute to Her Majesty using shipping containers to honour the late Queen at the Southern Port. There were so many opportunities to watch the state funeral around the country, including in around 125 cinemas and several cathedrals. Our special correspondent Ed Thomas is in Hull tonight. We can join him there now. Ed.
Yes, Fiona, this is Hull's City Hall, and we're standing in Queen Victoria Square. We're hundreds of miles from the capital, but the heaviness and significance of today was very much felt here. Even before the start of the state funeral, people were talking in hushed tones. That's because for many who came to watch on the big screen, there was a deep sense of respect for the Queen, and for some, there was also a personal connection.
From Westminster Abbey to the Humber.
This was Hull's day to look back.
Everyone sort of come together and the children will remember, and hopefully they'll tell their children.
Moments never to be forgotten.
So historic and so special, and she was such a good role model.
Together to say thank you to the Queen.
Just immensely proud to be British and to see what this country can do.
So when the Queen came, it was a bit nervous because it's a bit scary having the Queen watching you do your job.
5 years ago, Melissa Tweddle met the Queen.
That's me there, look. Getting ready to do a pretend cesarean section.
At the time, she was a student midwife, just beginning her career.
Everybody was really excited. I had to make sure that I didn't trip over anything and drop the baby. Today, although it's a funeral, it's also like a celebration of everything.
And it's just incredible to think that that person has gone.
People sharing this moment, touched by the life and reign of Queen Elizabeth II.
It was just really sad. Now, I'm still sad, but I think it's a great way to remember her.
9-year-old Ava Tweddle, ending that report by Ed Thomas. Queen Elizabeth said that her whole life would be dedicated to serving the country. Our home editor, Mark Easter, now looks at her life and legacy and what she meant to the nation.
I name this ship Queen Elizabeth II.
There is a hole in our nation's life where the Queen used to be.
Queen Elizabeth II went down to meet the sea.
A golden chain has been broken. A requiem played to a kingdom's proud past.
When the Queen came to the throne, Britain and the world were still coping with the privations and aftermath of the Second World War, and still living by the conventions of earlier times.
Figurehead of the greatest generation, the Queen was respected for values burnished by war. Patient queuing, a fitting act to honour a sovereign who understood the significance of good manners, especially in dark days.
We should take comfort that while we may have more still to endure, better days will return. We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again.
Her death detaches living memory from the country's finest hour. But her parting is cloaked in a pall of patriotism that emboldens national self-belief. She and the institution she represents have framed Britain as a country with a special place in history and the world. Representatives from every corner have come to honour our Queen.
This is a nation, a commonwealth, a world saying farewell to the longest reigning British monarch.
The United Kingdom stands proudly in the spotlight of global attention. But it is a day edged in black.
Many in Britain are mourning their Queen, but also the death of an idea. Elizabeth signified a country unwavering in its commitment to duty and to decency.
Goodwill is better than resentment. Tolerance is better than revenge. Compassion is better than anger. Above all, a lively concern for the interests of others as well as our own.
The Queen understood loss. "Grief is the price we pay for love," she famously wrote in a letter to the US President after 9/11. Grief was on parade in London today. And so her kingdom comes to the moment of farewell. The chapter is complete. Tonight we shall feel the weight of its final full stop. Mark Easton, BBC News.
We will be back at Windsor very shortly as we continue our coverage of the funeral of Queen Elizabeth. All throughout the evening, we'll be hearing from people who wanted to be part of this day. For a moment, though, we leave you with some of the most poignant images from a day when hundreds of thousands of people turned up to say a final goodbye to the Queen.
We gather from across the nation, from the Commonwealth, and from the nations of the world, to mourn our loss, to remember her long life of selfless service, and in sure confidence to commit her to the mercy of God, our Maker and Redeemer.
Service in life, hope in death. All who follow the Queen's example and inspiration of trust and faith in God can with her say, we will meet again. Let us commend to the mercy of God, our Maker and Redeemer, the soul of Elizabeth, our late Queen.
the hands of God the soul of his servant Queen Elizabeth.
Hurricane Fiona is battering the Dominican Republic, affecting Puerto Rico still. With the slow-moving nature of the storm, it's giving exceptional amounts of rainfall. So we'll continue to risk catastrophic flooding and mudslides. The storm surge inundating coastal areas with flooding and destructive winds as well. It's also going to affect the Virgin Islands and then move into open waters, intensify to become a major hurricane, heads towards the Turks and Caicos for Tuesday, also passing close by to the Bahamas and then towards Bermuda Bermuda later in the week. So this is a powerful and a major storm that we're concerned with at the moment. It's already had significant impacts across parts of the Caribbean. We've also got Storm Madeline, which is sitting off the west coast of Mexico, following almost the same sort of areas as Leicester, which we had at the end of last week, but a lot of rainfall to come here and through Central America. Across North America, we've got the heat with us in eastern areas and some severe thunderstorms. We've got some rains, much needed rains, pushing across California and into the Rockies as well. You can see some rains and thunderstorms coming down across parts of the central parts of Canada. Behind it, some chilly air as well. So we will see temperatures falling away and still some showers with us across parts of Florida too. So looking at some of the city forecasts for the coming few days, further north, it's still pretty wet. Not as stormy as it's been though further north around the Bering Sea. We've got possibly a shower or two. Wouldn't like to rule them out for Chicago, but 1 or 2 around in Tampa. We've got colder air now starting to push its way across Chile and Argentina. Snow to relatively low levels here. Temperatures well below average and some heavy rain as well. And that'll push northwards into northern Argentina, Bolivia and Paraguay, Uruguay too. This is the rain that's still left over from the typhoon Namadol, which has brought record-breaking rainfall to parts of Japan and catastrophic flooding as well. It's moving out of the way, but in its wake there are still a lot of heavy showers to come. It's very warm air surrounding that storm. There's more online.
Thwaites Glacier, it's an incredibly alluring and attractive place to go. I was really excited to visit because every coastline in the world will be changed by what happens in that part of Antarctica. So it's all the more important that we